All right, Shabbosai, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. It's a zchus to be able to continue to learn with you. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be there with you in person this morning, but Baruch Hashem, at least we could be together live virtually. I don't know, until about 2 years ago, I would have thought that that statement doesn't make sense, but now, Baruch Hashem, in our new world, it actually makes a little bit of sense. Thank you to Maishi and to Jeremy for helping to set up the logistics at Shul. It's great to see the Chavra in Shul, at least part of the Chavra in Shul. Great to see the Chavra online. And also with that, let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors, thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan. Baruch Mary Rina Duman for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in the Schus Shlema for their niece Chava Devora Bas Chaya Tzipora, Chaim Devora, Chava Devora Bas Chaya Malka, We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, she together with Kol Chol Yisrael will have a complete and enduring refuah. We thank Shmuley and Liba Dinovitz for dedicating all the Shimon Droshos this month in memory of Shmuley's father, Harav Peretz Avram Ben Rav Binyamin Moshe Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, then Hashem will have an aliyah and the family in Nechama. And also with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful daf ahead of us today, a lot to do today. Today's daf is Kuf Yud Gimel 113. We left off on Kuf Yud Beis Amud Beis 112b, and we left off 20 lines up from the bottom. So a lot to do. But again, we'll get through the Mishnah relatively quickly, and then Emir Hashem begin to really go ahead and delve into the sugya. So we left off 20 lines up from the bottom. Last word on the line. Shnei achin, echad cheresh ve'echad bikeach. Two brothers. One is a cheresh and one is a bikeach. Nisun l'shtei achayos. So we're married to two sisters. Achas chareshas ve'achas pikachos. One is a chareshas and one is a pikachos. Meis cheresh bal chareshas. If the cheresh husband, the husband of the chareshas dies, ma yaseh bikeach bal pikachos. What should we'll call it the Pikeach husband, the typical husband. What should he go ahead? The husband who is the husband of the Pikachas, the typical woman, what should he do? Ultimately, again, there's no Yibum, because once again, the Yevama is his wife's sister, and therefore, again, no Yibum. Meis Pikeach Bal Pikachas Ma'yase Cheresh Bal Meis Pikeach Bal Pikachas. So ultimately, again, if the Pikeach brother who is married to the Pikeach wife passes away, so Ma Ya'aseh Cheresh Bal Chareshes, what should the brother who's a Cheresh, who's married to the Chareshes do? Motzies Ishto Begat. Ultimately, he divorces his wife with a get. Ve'esh es achiv asur li'olam. So also remember, again, we keep on seeing these cases over and over, where either lemaisa again, yibum or chalitza won't happen because of achos isha, or second possibility is that you have a conflict or a clash between a man who has a rabbinic marriage with a woman, ultimately again, and I would say a rabbinic marriage, and then clashing with a biblical obligation of yibum. If you have two brothers, one a cheresh, one a pikeach, married to two unrelated women, so pikchos, and both women are pikchos, both women are typical regular women. Meis cheresh bal pikachas, mayas and pikeach bal pikachas. If the husband who's a cheresh married to the typical woman dies, what should the surviving brother do? Ocholis o miyavim. So remember, this is no sisters anymore. So halacha l'maisa, they could either do chalitza or yibum. Meis pikeach bal pikachas, mayas cheresh bal pikachas. If ultimately again the pikeach husband married to the pikachas dies, what should the cheresh husband do? What should the cheresh surviving brother do? He marries her and doesn't divorce her. Again, we'll explain why that is. He marries her because there's yibum, but when it comes to divorce, we may have an issue because he is a cheresh. So you'll find an interesting dynamic here. That, again, like I said, we'll get into all of these cases, but this is a fascinating one because here you have a cheresh who's marrying a woman through yibum, which is biblical, yet a cheresh's ability to divorce his wife is only dirabanan. So in a normal situation where a cheresh marries a woman normally, then halacha lamaisa, what we say is, okay, we'll see this in the Gemara in just a moment, you got married rabbinically, you could get divorced rabbinically. The interesting thing is that when a cheresh does yibum, he has a biblical relationship, but yet again lacks the ability or the intellectual faculties or capacity to dissolve it in a biblical fashion. So you can have a situation where he does yibum and he's never able to divorce this woman. Again, we'll see all of this in greater depth in just a bit. So the Gemara says, Shnei achin pichin nisun lebeis nachrios, two regular brothers married to two unrelated women. Achas pikachos va'achas chareshes. One is a pikeach and one is a cheresh. Meis pikeach ba'chareshes. If the husband who is married to the chareshes dies, what should the pikeach husband do? Pikeach brother do? Kones, ultimately again he could do yibum. V'imratze the hotzi yotzi, and if he wants to divorce her afterwards, he could divorce her afterwards. Meis pikeach ba'al pikachas. If ultimately again the pikeach married to the pikachas dies, what should the brother who is the pikeach married to the bal chareshes do? Again, I will say it's a typical case. He has the options of yibam or chalitza. Shnei achin, echad cherish ve'echad pikeach nesuin mebeis nachrios achas chareshes va'achas pikachas. So I will say in the last case, two brothers. One is a cheresh, one is a pikeach, married to two unrelated women. One is a chareshes, one is a pikachos. Meis cheresh bal chareshes. If the husband who is the cheresh married to the chareshes dies, ma yaseh pikeach bal pikachas. What should the typical brother married to the typical woman do? So ultimately, kones, he has the ability to do yibum. V'imratze l'hotzi yotzi, and if he wants to divorce her subsequently, he could do so. Meis pikeach bal pikachas. If the pikeach husband married to the pikachas dies, ma yaseh cheresh bal chareshes. So I will say, then what does the cheresh brother do? So kones fein l'motzi. So I'll say that's what we just said before. He could do yibum. The cheresh brother could do yibum. The problem once again is once a cheresh brother does yibum, there is no longer, and once he marries her, there is no longer an ability to go ahead and divorce her. Once again, because the marriage will be biblical in nature, yibum, but yet a cheresh's ability to navigate in relationships ultimately again is only a dirabanan. Beautiful. But let's say all these cases. Now let's drill in, not as much to the cases, but a bit more into some of the concepts. So we'll say, says the Gemara, 7 lines up from the bottom. Amarai Barchamo. Maishna cheresh v'charesh es tetakinu l'rabanan nisuin, u'maishna d'shota, shota v'shota, t'lo takinu l'rabanan nisuin. And I will say, I mentioned this in yesterday's shir, one of the greatest novelties of this Mishnah is that we see that there is a concept of marriage by a cheresh. Who knew? Who knew? My entire Talmudic life, I always assumed cheresh shota v'katan, all of them lack capacity. Marriage requires capacity, so cheresh shouldn't have the ability to enter into marriage. Yet we see that that's clearly not the case. Now, obviously, a cheresh can't affect biblical marriage, but the Rabbanon were metakin. They created some type of rabbinic marriage for the cheresh. To which the Gemara says, great. If that's the case, why is it that the Rabbanon only created a rabbinic marriage for a cheresh and not a shota? And not a shota. They will say, remember, a shota is an insane person, or person lacks capacity. So remember again, it will say, what's the Gemara's question? Generally, we group cheresh and shota together. So if Chazal are going out of their way to create a rabbinic construct of marriage for a cheresh, why don't they create a rabbinic construct of marriage for a shota? To which the Gemara says something amazing. The Gemara says, "The sign shota v'kan shenasu nashu mesim nishosem tros minachlitzim in a yibum." It will say, the Brisa says that if a shota or a katan were married, now again we'll see that they were married and then they died without children, there's no yibum or chalitza, which is another way of saying that their marriage isn't a marriage. Their marriage isn't a marriage. To which the Gemara says, so why is it again that Chazal instituted marriage for a cheresh but not for a shota? To which the Gemara gives a fascinating answer. Cheresh v'chareshes tekaimet takanta d'Rabbanan takinu lehu Rabbanan nisuin. They will say when it comes to a cheresh and a chareshes who have the ability to live together, they have the ability to live together. So therefore, Chazal instituted for them a construct of rabbinic marriage. What does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. This is so fascinating. Tekaimet takanta d'Rabbanan shedarkan lihios shalom beinehen. I will say, cheresh and chareshes have the ability to live together. They could create what is for them a normal life, and they can ultimately again live b'shalom. They can live peacefully together. Therefore, afilu cheresh and chareshes choshkin k'shipikach. So I will say, so therefore again, this is incredible. When a man and woman could live b'shalom together, so ultimately again, in a case like that, Chazal instituted a rabbinic construct of marriage. We go back to the Gemara. However, shota v'shota, the low time atakanta d'Rabbanan, but I will say a shota and a shota who cannot live together. Why not? De'in adam dar im nachash pikafifa achas. A person can't live together with a snake in one basket. In other words, what is it saying? See, chirish and chareshes, there's a physical disability. There's a physical disability. So especially two people who share the same physical disability, or even if you have one typical person, another person with disability, there's an ability to create a shalomdik marriage together. But with a shota is a person who totally lacks capacity. A shota is a person who's unpredictable. A shota is a person who engages in erratic behavior. There is no way to forge a normative relationship with such a person like that. So therefore, Chazal did not feel that it was necessary or appropriate for that matter, to create a rabbinic construct of marriage for such a situation. I will say a very profound yesod also, once again, in Chazal's understanding of marriage, that I will say we've been speaking about again some of the core components necessary for a meaningful and fulfilling marriage. So we saw in two days or yesterday's daf, we saw the notion of growing together. Now we see what else is necessary for a proper marriage. Shalom. Shalom. If you don't have shalom, if you don't have peace in your marriage, there's nothing to talk about. There is no marriage, there is no relationship. So it's pretty incredible. So the Gemara says over here, for a cheresh who has the ability to create a relationship of shalom, ultimately, again, will go ahead and create rabbinic marriage for them. But for a shota who has a fundamental inability to live a life of shalom just because of emotional instability or unpredictability, Chazal did not create marriage for them. Absolutely incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, "Umashna katan delo takin rabbanon nisuin, v'cheresh takin rabbanon nisuin." So ask another question. Why is it that a katan doesn't have marriage? A katan can't affect marriage, yet a cheresh can. Others are both saying it's all the same kasha, because these three people, cheresh, shota, and katan, are always grouped together. So if now we're seeing that Chazal created a rabbinic framework of marriage for a cheresh, why not create the rabbinic framework of marriage for a katan? In other words, we'll say, now let's be clear. We're not talking about a father's ability to marry off his daughter. That's biblical. We're not even talking about over here a mother or a brother's ability to marry off a daughter. That's rabbinic. We're talking about stamakatan. Stamakatan. A boy wants to affect marriage. Why can't he? If after all, again, we're saying over here now that a cheresh could affect marriage, why can't a katan affect marriage? So I will say, interesting idea. So the Gemara says, cheresh delo asi lechlal nisuin takin rabbanon nisuin. Katan da asi lechlal nisuin lo takin rabbanon nisuin. A very, very simple distinction. Cheresh is in a state which is going to remain intact. That's a state. He's a cheresh. So if I will say, if Chazal don't do something for him, he'll never have the ability to affect marriage, and again, build out a family, everything that comes with that. Therefore, Chazal felt compelled to do something for him, to create for him a normative framework of marriage. Masha'in kina katan, wait. A little bit of time, and in Eretz Hashem, the katan will become a gadol, zak katan gadol yihya, and ultimately, again, he will be able to affect marriage in a normative fashion. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Harikitana das lichlal nisuin, v'takin rabbanon nisuin." But once I, what about a kitana? What about a female minor? So we'll say a female minor, as we just said before, Chazal instituted marriage for her, right? Again, that if there's no father, her mother or her brother can marry her off. So why don't we say, listen, why do we have to create any rabbinic framework of marriage for a kitana? Just let her wait. And in Eretz Hashem, she'll get married when she reaches the age of adulthood, to which the Gemara says, Hasam shlo yinagu ba minhag hefker. It's different. There, Chazal had a vested interest in creating for a framework of marriage in order that men not take advantage of her. So marriage provides her with a certain level of physical security, also financial security, and Chazal felt it was important for Interesting question. Why is it that a kitana has the ability to do miyun, right? Remember, her simple refusal to continue in their marriage dissolves the marriage. Midrabanan, right? You must remember again, miyun only works ultimately for kedusha dirabanan, where her brother or her mother marries her off, not where her father marries her off. Where her father marries her off, that's biblical marriage, and that requires a get. Rabbinic marriage could be dissolved with miyun. So ask the Gemara, so why can't the chareshas also dissolve her marriage with miyun. After all, it's a rabbinic marriage as well. Top of Kuf Yud Gimel, Mimani v'lo naspila. I will say, because you know why? Here's what's interesting. If Chareshes could go ahead and dissolve her marriage through miyun, ultimately, again, no man is going to marry her. Why? Look at Rashi. Rashi says, Tap Rashi, Kuf Yud Gimel and Alf 113a, first line, the Hoil Ula Olam Hi Chol Lamayim Mipnei Charushasa, Avakanik Vosha. Listen to this. No man is going to marry a Chareshes if forever she has the ability to do miyun. Then I will say at any given moment she could just dissolve the marriage. It's interesting. In that case, the man would have absolutely no marital security. So why would he marry such a woman? You'll say, but then why would he marry a kitana? Because she could also do miyun. Here's the difference with the kitana. With the kitana, there's a limited window in which she could perform miyun, only when she's a kitana. Once she reaches the age of adulthood, lamaisa, the marriage morphs into a normative marriage, and there's no longer an ability to do miyun. Since Chazal had a vested interest in ensuring that the Chareshes gets married, they did not give her the right of miyun. Fascinating. Why is it that a kitana has the ability to eat truma? Right? I will say when a kitana marries a kohen, she has the ability to eat truma. Yet, interestingly enough, a chareshes does not. Interesting. A chareshes, if she marries a kohen, as much as that marriage is a rabbinic marriage, she doesn't have the right to eat truma. Why is that? This nan. Hey, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudguda, ala chareshes she'sia avia sheyotze beget. Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudguda testified that a chareshes whose father married her off, that she goes out with a get. She goes out with a get. V'al kitano, bas Yisrael shenises lekohen shocheles betruma. And furthermore, it testified that if a kitana marries a kohen, she can marry truma. Now we can infer from that he's only spoke about a kitana who marries a kohen, not a chareshes who marries a kohen. Vilu chareshes lo achla. So you see from it that a chareshes can't eat truma if she marries a kohen. So why? Both a kitana and a chareshes really have the same level of marriage, right? They're both kiddushay dirabanan. If that's the case, then lamaisa, why could the kitana eat truma and yet the chareshes cannot? What are we concerned about? It's fascinating. We're concerned about a case of a kohen who is a cheresh who marries a chareshes. That's what we're really concerned about. That halacha lamaisa, I will say again, that's going to be a rabbinic marriage on all ends, and therefore we're concerned that she's going to end up eating truma. To which the Gemara says, "Let her eat truma." V'leichol katan ochal nevelosu. The Rebbe says a fascinating expression. There's a concept of katan ochal nevelos, which means if you see a katan eating something not kosher, right? So I will say, so the halacha is, I hate to say it like this, it's not a big deal. We don't give a katan something not kosher to eat. But lamaisa, if the katan is eating something not kosher, okay, you don't have to go ahead and go nuts over it. So the cheresh, or I should say the chareshes, is just like a katan. So if she's going to eat truma, is it really such a big deal? She doesn't have capacity. She doesn't have liability. So lamaisa, what's so terrible about allowing her to go ahead and eat truma? To which the Gemara says, oh, they will say, what's our real concern? Our real concern is that halacha lamaisa, if a cheresh kohen, listen to this, our real concern is a cheresh kohen marries a typical woman, a regular woman. So I will say, so now we have an issue. Because I will say, listen to this. A cheresh kohen who marries a typical woman, that is only a kiddushay dirabanan, that's a rabbinic marriage. The ability to eat truma is only given when? To biblical marriages. If a regular woman illegally eats truma, that is an incredibly serious transgression. So the Gemara says all of these cases that we mentioned over here, the real concern we have, at the end of the day, the real concern we have is for this last case. That's the real concern about a cheresh who marries a pikachas, a cheresh kohen marrying a typical woman. That's where we have our concern, lest she come to go ahead and eat truma. To which the Gemara says, but one second, even a cheresh with a pikachos, she should still be able to at least eat truma dirabanan, right? That should work to be able to eat Truma D'Rabbanan. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Gzeira Dilma Asila Ochla with Truma D'Oraisa. Ultimately, we're concerned that she may come to eat Truma D'Oraisa. So both say, so kind of just to bring this all together, this is really quite fascinating. See, even though a Ketana who marries a Kohen is permitted to eat Truma, a Chareshes who marries a Kohen is not. Now, why is that? Now, all of this is a concern because of a case of a Kohen Cheresh who marries a Pikachas. That's our great concern, because in that case, again, that's rabbinic marriage, and if the Pikachas ends up eating Truma, that would actually be a severe transgression. Incredible. Umayshna Ketana de is like Suva, Umayshna Chareshes de les like Suva. So ask the Gemara, why is it that a Ketana has a Ksuva? Right? If a Ketana marries a man, so there's an obligation, he has to give her a Ksuva, and yet the Chareshes does not have a Ksuva. So what's the Pshat? What's the Pshat? The Imkain Mimani Velo Naspila. They both say the concern is that Halacha Lamaisa, if you have to give a Chareshes a Ksuva, people aren't going to marry her. As I will say, remember again, you see this tension. We have a vested interest in marrying off the Chareshes. We have a vested interest in getting her into a marriage. So Lamaisa, anything that's going to potentially derail that, we go ahead and we avoid. So if there's a ksuva, that might say to a man, listen, if I have to pay a ksuva, I'm not going to marry this Chareshes. I'm not going to marry her. But if there's no ksuva, perhaps again that might be an additional motivation to have him marry her. Okay, Uketana Milan is like ksuva. But by the way, from where do you know that a ketana has a ksuva? Where do you know that from? To which the Gemara says, Disnan hamema enes v'ashnia va'elinis in like ksuva. So we'll say the Mishnah says mima enes, a girl who does miyun, or a shnia, which is a secondary rabbinic erva, or an islandess. All of these women don't have a ksuva. Aval yotze beget, but any woman who goes out with a get, ultimately again uktana, and a ketana is included in that. Yesh la ksuva, has a ksuva. V'charesh, okay, so we'll say you see a ketana has a ksuva. U'v'chareshes midalan dos like ksuva. And how do you know that a chareshes doesn't have a ksuva? To which the Gemara says, Desanyo cheresh v'shota, shenas cheresh v'shota, excuse me, shenasu pikchos. We'll say if you have a man who's a cheresh or a man who is a shota, who marries a typical regular woman, so what's the halacha? Afapi shenispakeach hacheresh v'nishtafa shota. This is very interesting. Even though both says, watch this case. The man is a cheresh or a shota. He marries a typical woman, a regular healthy woman. And then what happens? Baruch Hashem, he becomes healed, right? The man is now able to hear and to speak. He's no longer a cheresh. Or Baruch Hashem, he regained his mental faculties. So now Baruch Hashem again, he's not a shota anymore. So what's the halacha? Ein lahem aleim klum. Ultimately, it will say the women still have no claim of a ksuva against him, right? Because Lamaisa again, when he married them, he was a cheresh or a shota. There's no ksuva in that type of marriage. So halacha Lamaisa, even though now he's healed, there's no claim against. They have no ksuva against him. However, ratzu lakaimon yesh no ksuva. But now, but say since these men have been healed, if they want to continue in their marriage, ultimately again from this point forward, they will have a ksuva obligation. Upikeach shenasa chareshes o shota. But say similarly again, if you have a pikeach, so the man is a typical healthy guy, he marries a chareshes or a shota. Afilu kasav la meya mana ksuva. Right? Even if he writes, so let's say he decides to commit to her for an exorbitant ksuva of 100 mana, ksuva sakayemes. Ultimately, again, the ksuva stands. Why? Because he decided to give her money. We'll say that lashon of ratza lazuk b'nechasav means, listen, let's say if I don't owe someone money, but I decide to commit to them for some amount of money, that becomes a binding commitment. So if a man is not obligated to go ahead and provide a ksuva for his wife, but he chooses to do so, halacha l'maisa, again, that is his choice. And that choice is a binding one, to which the Gemara says, now the reason ultimately, again, that he is obligated in this ksuva is because he chose to. Halo ratza, ein lo, Ultimately, again, I will say you see from here that if the typical man, the pikeach, is marrying the chareshes, and he doesn't want to give her a ksuva, he doesn't have to. Why? Because also, as we said before, we're concerned that if you have to give a ksuva to a chareshes, then what's going to happen? People won't marry her. So in order to encourage marriage to a chareshes, to provide her with the safety, security, and benefits of marriage, ultimately, again, there's no ksuva. To which the Gemara says, 1 second, Ihachi pikachas lecherish liskin leksuva, the imki memani v'lo menas. We also listen to this. If that's the case, then when a typical woman, a pikachas woman, marries a cherish man, he should have to give her a ksuva. After all, again, because if you don't make him give her a ksuva, then what? Then what? People won't marry him. Both say this is incredible. We're not worried about that. Both say we're not worried about that. We're not worried about women not marrying a chirish man because of no ksuva. Why? Because Yoser me'a ish rotze lisa, isha rotze lihinase. More than a man wants to get married, a woman wants to get married. So I will say this is an absolutely fascinating dynamic. So what the Gemara is suggesting over here, I will say, is as follows. That halacha l'maisa, listen to this. Halacha l'maisa, the Gemara is suggesting that you don't have to incentivize marriage to a man who is a chiresh. Why? Because women want to get married, and women want to get married much more than men. So lemaisa, again, even if the man is a chiresh, you don't have to throw in a ksuva to incentivize marriage to him. Conversely, if the woman is a chareshes, if you put a ksuva in there, that may go ahead and be an obstacle to a man marrying her. So quite a fascinating idea. Good. Was an interesting story. There was a cheresh, a guy who was a cheresh who lived in the neighborhood of Rav Malkio. Ansebe isisa Rav Malkio. So he married a woman because of la arba meos zuzi menechase. And was this Rav Malkio arranged that the woman should have a ksuva of 400 zuz, an exorbitant ksuva. So I will say, so again, so we just got finished saying that when the man is a cheresh, right? The man is a cheresh and he's marrying a pikachas, there's no obligation for ksuva. Yet again, this case happened in the neighborhood of Rav Malkio, and Rav Malkio arranged a very expensive ksuva. Amar Rava. We'll say first wide line, Kuf Gud Gimel Dalv 113a. Amar Rava, Man Chochen Rav Malkio. Who is as smart as Rav Malkio? Why? The Gavra Rabbahu, Kasavar Ilu Rasa Shivcha L'Shamsho, Milo Zabninane, Kol Shekein Hacha Di Ikutarti. There was listen to this. Rav Malkio said to the Cheresh community as follows, you would need someone regardless to take care of you. Right? You would need someone, whatever it is, you need someone to help you in the house. You need someone to help look after you. You need someone to help take care of domestic responsibility. You would need someone regardless. So now, Baruch Hashem, you found a wife who could provide you with all of the care you need, plus provide you with companionship, provide you with marriage, hopefully provide you with a family. So Lamais, again, isn't it worth it, quote unquote, to pay for such a woman, right? In other words, that he was encouraging him. In other words, you would have had an outlay and expense regardless, right? And you would have had no marital benefits from that outlay. Now, Baruch Hashem, you could have a wife, you could have a life, you could have a mishpacha. Certainly, it's worth it for you to give her a ksuva. It's quite beautiful. So I will say, so to be clear, the conclusion of the Gemara is not changing. In other words, there's no obligation of a ksuva in a cheresh relationship. But again, Lamaisa, even if there's no obligation, the cheresh husband absolutely has the right to commit himself to such a ksuva should he choose. Good. Eishes cheresh in chayav aleh asham toler. What's another interesting case? Saeed, it's not the same as yours. I'm not gonna lie, not the same as yours. I'm on my third cup already, and I'm still not feeling awake. All right, so the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rav Chiba Ashi Amar Shmuel, Eishes cheresh in chayav aleh asham toler. So we'll say, let's talk about this in just a moment. Let's say a man has relations with the wife of a cheresh. Okay, so ultimately, again, a woman married to a cheresh, which we've kind of seen before we thought it's a rabbinic marriage of sorts, comes along Shmuel and says that halacha l'maisa, if a man has relations with the wife of a cheresh, he is not chayiv in asham talui. Now, both say asham talui. If you look at Rashi, right, it's the fourth of the wide lines in Rashi. In chalam shum asham talui, the name of safek ish es ish, safek hayabadas, safek einbo, va'abala ba'asham talui, devade ein lo shum kinyam min haTorah. And I will say, asham talui is the sin offering that is brought in a case where you may have committed a serious transgression. So here's what's interesting. One might have thought that one would be obligated to go ahead and bring in asham talui if one commits adultery or if one has relations with the wife of a cheresh. Because maybe, again, we're not sure what exactly is the nature of the relationship. Shmuel comes along and says that if a man has relations with the wife of a cheresh, he is not obligated to bring in asham talui, which I will say is another way of saying that according to Shmuel, there is no marriage for a cheresh. There's no marriage. They could live together, they could have some type of rabbinic union, but lamaisa, again, it's not marriage. It's not marriage. And therefore, again, if another man were to have relations with her, this would not be called adultery on any level. Let's say that the following brisa supports Shmuel's opinion. Chamisha lo yisrael. There are 5 people who shouldn't take truma. Ve'im tarmon, if they did separate truma, in trumas and truma. Their separation is not a valid separation of Elohim. These are these people. Cheresh shoteh v'katan. A cheresh is shoteh and a katan. V'atar m'shen shalor. Somebody takes truma from produce that's not their own. Va'oved kochavim shetar mes Yisrael, or a Gentile who takes truma from the produce of a Yisrael. Afilu b'reshus Yisrael, with the permission of Yisrael, ein trumaso truma. Ultimately, again, the truma is not good. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see, so again, what does this price say? That if we're focusing on a cheresh, if a cheresh separates out truma, his act, the truma separation, is meaningless and invalid. So Rabbi say this seems to support Shmuel. Shmuel's of the opinion that the actions of a cheresh are meaningless. Therefore, even if a cheresh affects marriage, meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. V'haraya, even if you have relations with his wife, that's not called adultery. There's not even an asham talui. To which the Gemara says, maybe not. Hu damak Rabbi Elazar. It could be that Shmuel himself holds like Rabbi Elazar. What does Rabbi Elazar say? This Rabbi Yitzchak Amishon Rabbi Elazar, Shrumas Cheresh Lo Teitze L'Chulin, Mibnei Shu Safek. Rabbi say it could be that in the Truma case, Shmuel holds like Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Elazar holds that no, when a Cheresh separates out Truma, it's a Safek whether or not the separation was good. So Shmuel holds like that by Truma. One second, if that's the case, Israel Rabbi Elazar, Asham Taloi Nami L'Chayiv. But one second, if Shmuel holds like Rabbi Elazar by Truma, and Rabbi Elazar holds that by Truma, that which a Cheresh does is Safek, whether or not it was meaningful or meaningless. If that's the case, then if a man has relations with the wife of a Cheresh, you should be Chayiv in Asham. When it comes to Asham Talui, there's a special halacha about Asham Talui, which is, Rabbi say, the typical case of Asham Talui is like this. You have 2 pieces of meat. One is basar, one is chalev. And what happens? You ate one of them. What don't you know? What don't you know? Which one you ate. I will say, so that's the typical case of Asham Talui, what we call chaticha achos mishtei chatichos. There's 2 bodies, there's 2 entities, one aser, one mutter, you just don't know which one you engaged with. In this case over here, this is the right, when we talk about the wife of a cheresh, so this is not, that doesn't follow that model. This is one woman. We're just not sure of her status. So we'll say, so just to follow what's happening over here. Shmuel says, follow the progression. Shmuel says that if a man has relations with the wife of a cheresh, he is not chayiv an asham talui. He's not chayiv an asham talui. Now, I will say, so then the Gemara says, what does that tell you? That tells that according to Shmuel, the marriage of a cheresh is not a marriage. The Gemara says, oh, great. I'll bring a brisa that supports him. What's the brisa that supports him? That if a cheresh separates out truma, his designation is meaningless. That shows that the actions of a cheresh are totally, fundamentally meaningless. To which the Gemara says, hold on. It could be that by truma, Shmuel holds like Rabbi Elazar. Right, and Rabbi Elazar holds that if a cheresh separates out truma, then Allah Chalamais, it's a safek. It's a safek. Well, if that's what he holds like by Rabbi Elazar, then if you have relations with the wife of a cheresh, you should be chayiv in asham talui as well. Safek, is she married? Is she not married? To which the Gemara says, no. Shmuel holds there's no asham talui, because I will say the din for asham talui is a very specific circumstance of chaticha achas mishtei chatichos. Two things in front of you, one motor, one aser. You engaged with one, you don't know which one you engaged in, that's asham talui. But I will say, in this case over here, that's not the case. Here you had relations with a woman who's married to a cheresh. The shaila is she married, is she not married? But that's not chatich achas mishtei chatichos. It's a suffix in one entity. Good. Umi by Rabbi Lazar chaticha mishtei chatichos. Then I will say, does Rabbi Lazar himself require this model of chaticha achas, one piece of two pieces, in order to be chayiv in asham talui? After all, again, the Gemara says, V'tanya Rabbi Lazar Omer Kai Chayavin al Chelbo Asham Taloi. Rabbi say a Kai. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says over here. Actually, we'll leave it. So no Kai. Fine. Kai I will say is an animal. Now the difference with a Kai I will say is Kai is a suffix behema suffix chaya. Is a Kai in the behema category or a chaya category? I will say, what's the difference? A behema, chaylev is aser, its fat is aser. On chaya, the fat is not aser. So yet Rabbi Lazar is on record as saying, kai, if you eat the chaylev of a kai, you're chayiv, right? You're chayiv in asham taloi, because maybe you ate forbidden fat. Now I will say, that's not chaticha achas mishtei chatichos. Ultimately, again, that's one thing, and yet you're still chayv asham taloi. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Shmuel savak Rabbi Lazar bechada, upala gali bechada. It could be that Shmuel holds almost like Rabbi Lazar in one case, maybe like by Truma, but ultimately doesn't hold like Rabbi Lazar in the case of Asham Taloi. Okay, the Gedamir alternate version of this, Amr B'chia Bar Ashi Amr Shmuel, Eishes Cheresh Chayav and Aleh Asham Taloi. Rabbi Lazar there's an alternate version of this. The alternate version of this is, if a man has relations with the wife of a Cheresh, you are Chayiv in Asham Taloi. The Gemara says, in whose opinion does this reflect? Ultimately, again, the Gemara says, Meisvei Chamish Lo Yisramu, Savla Rabbi Lazar. We'll say in this version, Shmuel holds like Rabbi Lazar, namely that for Asham Talui, you don't need Chaticha Achas Mishtei Chaticha. So I will say, so two very interesting halachas. So first of all, we'll say, we paskin that if a man has relations with the wife of a Cheresh, he is not Chayiv in Asham Talui. Because I will say, at most, remember again, halacha l'mais, at most, we are affecting rabbinic marriage for a cheresh, not biblical marriage. If it's not biblical marriage, then there can't be any level of rabbinic liability for adultery with her. That's number one. I will say, what I will tell you is also something very interesting. By Asham Talui, how do we paskin? You only bring in Asham Talui in a case of chaticha achos mishtei chatichos. You need this paradigm of two pieces, one mutter, one aser. You engaged with one, not sure which one you engaged with. That's the case of Asham Talui. But a suffix that exists within one entity, that ultimately is not a Asham Talui case. Very interesting. Second to last line from the bottom. Kof Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Boy Rav Ashi, my time with Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi say this is really fascinating. What is Rabbi Lazar's logic? So Rabbi say Rabbi Lazar holds that halacha l'maisa, it appears that Rabbi Lazar would hold that in the case of an Eishes Cheresh, ultimately, again, one would be chayiv in asham taloi. So right, that's Rabbi Lazar's logic. If a man has really, so again, both say, so Ruvain is married to a cheresh, or Ruvain's a cheresh, married to a woman, right? Shimon comes along and has relations with her. Rabbi Lazar says he's chayiv in asham taloi. Shimon is chayiv in asham taloi. What's his logic? To which the Gemara says, Mifshat pshitale, the cheresh daita kalishtahu, umiu mesap kile I daita tzilusa, I Lab daitet salusa, uli olam chada daitu. So we'll say, let's go back for just a moment. Look at the last Rashi of Amud Aleph for just a moment. Rashi says over here, so kilishta daka klomer daitu mu'ete she'enu mechudad lahavin kshabnei adam. We misaklam, so in the last Rashi in Amud Aleph, osek tasadash lo im sulula u'b'mashu nosin daitu va'osed davar vadai kavanaso kavana ilav daitu sululahi. Uli olam kol yomav shel cheresh pshitei Rabbi Lazar dechada daita islay lecheresh de'eno itim cham. So we'll say, how does Rabbi Lazar view a cheresh? On one hand, we know that a cheresh doesn't have full capacity, but on the other hand, maybe a cheresh doesn't lack complete capacity. So maybe he has what we call, he doesn't have daita silusa, which means clarity, but he has maybe this daito kalishta, this lighter level of das. But the idea is that a chirish has one consistent level of awareness of das, a diminished das, but one consistent level of awareness throughout his life. Is that how we look? Is that how we look at a chirish? O Dilma, pshitale dedaite kalishta, v'lav daite tzilusa. Rather, no. On the other hand, perhaps we say no. A chirish has complete diminished capacity. However, v'hacha hainu taima kevan di'itim chalim v'itim shota. So I will say this is incredible. How do we? So I will say tut studim to look at a chirish, right? Do we say that? Here's what we know. Possibility one: chirish clearly doesn't have complete capacity, but maybe he has a level of diminished capacity. But that diminished capacity is a constant diminished capacity. In other words, he has one state, and that one state is continuous. Or the other possibility is that no, in general, a chirish has no capacity. But yet, interestingly enough, sometimes he does have complete capacity. In other words, there are moments of absolute clarity, moments of what we call daita tsilula, right? The itim chalim, sometimes he's totally normal, itim shotes. In other words, we'll say, do we view a chirish as consistently diminished capacity or generally no capacity, but sometimes moments of clarity? Take a look at Rashi. Odilma pshitale, the lav daita tzilusi, elahainu time the misapkale, the itim shu chalim legamre, v'daito tzilula, v'chayshina shema b'shas kiddush nechalim. So we'll say, so let me just go back for just a moment. Remember, Rabbi Lazar said that if you have relations with the wife of a chirish, that you're chayiv a asham talui, which means that it's a safek kiddushin. Safek kiddushin. So why is it a safek kiddushin? So there are two ways to look at this. Possibility A is when Rabbi Lazar looks at a chirish, what does he see? A person who does not have complete capacity, but has a consistent level of diminished capacity. And perhaps in this consistent level of diminished capacity, maybe he has the right or has the ability to affect some level of marriage. Or the other possibility is that no, he has no capacity. But the interesting part about a chirish is that there are moments where he has what? Complete capacity. And what are we concerned about? That maybe he affected kiddushin with his wife in one of those moments of complete capacity, and that's why if you have relations with her, ultimately it's an asham taloi. To which the Gemara says, okay, now we'll say, now either way is kind of saying the same thing, which is a chirish doesn't have complete capacity, may have either some level of consistent capacity or moments of complete capacity. All right, but either way, I understand what Rabbi Lazar is saying is it's a safek, and that's why if he marries a woman, she's a safek ishes ish. But the Gemara says, Lamai nafkamina. They will say, but what's the chilik between these two approaches? Listen to this. Lahotzi ishto beget. Wow. They will say, if a chirish marries a woman, does he have the ability to divorce her with a get? Now remember again, get requires das. So watch this. They will say, if you go with the first approach, that a chirish has a consistent level of diminished capacity. So therefore, again, Abba say the same way he could affect marriage with his consistent level of diminished capacity, he could affect divorce with that same level of diminished capacity. Shota. Abba say, watch this. But if you hold that a chirish, sometimes he's mamish a shota, and sometimes he has complete capacity, then what? Matzi mekadish, kiddushe matzi mekadish, girushe la matzi megarish. So Abba says, listen to this. Then here's the problem. He can't divorce his wife. Why can't he divorce his wife? Because it's possible that when he effected kiddushin, what state was he in? A complete level of total capacity, total intact capacity. And maybe now when he wants to divorce her, he's in a state of diminished capacity. So therefore, Rabbi say, therefore, again, in that case, he would not be able to give her a get. So Rabbi says, so the Gemara says, so which one is it? To which the Gemara says, teku. To which the Gemara says, we're not sure. So we'll say, I'll just point out something. Now again, I want to point out, we don't pass like Rabbi Lazar, right? So remember again, we hold that you're not chayiv in asham talui, ultimately again, for an act of relations with the wife of a chirish. We also, right, but again I will say, we also hold that a chirish's marriage is totally derabanan. But it is fascinating to see this chakira in how we look at chirish. Is he someone of a consistent level of diminished capacity, but it's diminished, but it's consistent? or no, he's generally no capacity or highly diminished, but we assume maybe there are moments of lucidity or there are moments of complete capacity. So that's the tension we find in Cherish. Beautiful. Let's go back to the status. So again, we go weiter. So remember again, the Gemara goes on. The Gemara says as follows: the Shabbos, Amri Yitzchak, Devar Torah, Shota Miskareshes. So we'll say, listen to this. So Rav Yitzchak says, Mida Oraisa, a man who is married to a Shota, ultimately, again, he could divorce her. So I will say, this could be in a couple of different capacities. In other words, so whether he married a woman who was typical, right? Ultimately, again, ultimately, again, she becomes nishtatis. She becomes a shota. He has the ability to divorce her. Why? Midi dehava pikachas bal karcha. I will say because ultimately, again, it's no different than a regular woman who could be divorced against her will. In other words, I will say halacha lamaisa. Even with a regular woman who has total capacity, you are allowed to divorce a woman without her consent. To which the Gemara says, "Umatam amru eina migrash." So we'll say, so here's interesting. So really, because you don't need the consent of a woman for gerushin, therefore halacha l'maisa, even by a shota, you should be able to divorce her. Umatam amru eina migrashes. So why did Chazal tell a husband that he cannot divorce his shota wife? Why not? To which the Gemara shloi now go ba minag hefker. Because we'll say we're concerned that if a shota is divorced, the shota woman is divorced, people take advantage of her. People take advantage of her. To which the Gemara says, well, what's the case? Hechidami. So we'll say, remember again, there's different shades of being a shota. If she's the type of woman who, if she were to receive a get, could guard her get and also knows how to look out for her person, for her body, then ultimately, again, minagi ba minak hefker, then Abba says she'll be fine. She'll be fine. People won't take advantage of her. Ela de'enyo das lishmar gita v'lo atzma. So Abba says, so now what are we talking? We're talking about a woman who ultimately, again, doesn't know how to guard her document and also doesn't know how to take care of herself. So I'll say that's the case where Chazal were concerned that if we allow a husband to divorce his wife in this state, other people take advantage of her. To which the Gemara says, "V'lasma tvar Torah shota miskareshes." In this kind of case, would midarais, would you be able to divorce such a woman after Avaha Amri de Rabbi Yanai, the nasan biyada? Both the Torah says as follows. Torah says, "You shall put the get in her hand." The nasan biyada. Mishi yesh yad legaresh atzma. I will say a woman has to be able, her hand, she has to have a hand, right? In other words, I will say, as much as halacha l'maisa you could divorce someone against her will, she has to have basic capacity to be able to receive and to look after her get. This would exclude ultimately, and I will say, a woman who doesn't have the ability to receive and to guard her own get. The Tanya Rishon says, you have to send the wife away from your home. Misha, when you divorce her, Misha Mishal Chavenu Chalzeres. Rabbi say this refers to a woman where when you divorce her, she's going to leave. Right? The Gemara says, but if a woman gets divorced, she leaves home and she comes back. In other words, what does it mean she leaves home and she comes back? She doesn't have the capacity to recognize what divorce really is. Ultimately, again, she's not divorced. So Rabbi say, let's analyze it just a moment. So remember, the Mishnah said that if a woman is a shota, her husband should not divorce her. The Gemara says, Midoraisa, he can't divorce her. Why can you divorce a shota? Because divorce doesn't require consent. So the same way that divorce doesn't require consent, ultimately, halacha l'maisa, a man could divorce his wife even if she's a shota. So why did the Rabbanan say don't? Because we don't want people to take advantage of her. But one second, the Gemara says if we're talking about a woman who people could take advantage of, that means she has no das. If she has no das, then even mid'araisa you can't. In other words, as much as divorce doesn't require consent, divorce requires another party who has das. But if we're talking about a woman who can't guard her get, can't guard her person, then lemaisi even mid'araisa you can't divorce her. What are we talking about? A woman who has enough capacity to guard a document, right? If you put something in her hand, she could watch over that, but she does not know how to watch over herself. To which the Gemara says, Dvar Torah, Shota Miskareshes, the hayodas lishmar gita. Rabbi say in such a case, midaraisa, the only level of capacity you need is enough capacity that if you put something in her hand, she knows how to take care of it. But if she can't look after herself, you could still divorce her midaraisa. The hayodas lishmar gita. Va'amra will say it's in that case where even though again, since she has the ability to guard that which is in her hand, ultimately what you have the right midaraisa to divorce her. Chazal stepped in and said, "Va'amra lo lifka shelo yinagu ba minag hefker." In that case, I will say that Rabbanan stepped in and said, no. In that kind of case, even though midaraisa, you can divorce her. But since halacha lemaisa, we are concerned that what? That halacha lemaisa, she can't look after herself. People are going to take advantage of her. In that case, Chazal said, you can't divorce her. You can't divorce her. Amar Abaye, dekanami diktani gabe dida, nishtatis lo yotzi. So also Abaye says this is the diak in the Mishnah. Because if you look at the Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah says if she becomes a shota, so the Mishnah says lo yotzi, the husband can't divorce her. The gabi didei, yet if the husband becomes a shota and he's married, in other words, he got married, he was a normal guy when he got married, then it becomes a shota. The Mishnah says first white line will say lo yotzi olamis, he can never divorce her. Then I will say, see the difference in the lashon? When she becomes a shota, the Mishnah says he cannot divorce her. When he becomes a shoteh, the Mishnah says he can never divorce her forever. Why is it safe forever by him and not forever by her? Here's the difference. Ma'ishnahacha diktani olamis, u'ma'ishnahasam delo katani olamis, elashmamina hadaraisa hadrabanan. We'll say, here we go. Watch this. You see, when he becomes a shoteh, I will say, mid-da'oraisa, he can't affect divorce. Because since he doesn't have das, he can't affect divorce. That's why the Mishnah says he can never divorce her. Meaning that means da'oraisa, he can never divorce her. I will say when she becomes a shota, could he divorce her? Yeah. As long as she has enough capacity to hold that get in her hand and watch that get, she's good, right? In other words, he could divorce her mid-da'oraisa. Mid-drabanan, he's not allowed to divorce her. Why? Again, we're assuming we're talking about a case about a woman who can't look after herself, because we're concerned that halacha l'maisa, people will take advantage of her. So it doesn't use lashon of olamis forever, because olamis means da'araisa. It's telling us that halacha l'maisa mid-da'araisa, he can divorce her, but mid-drabanan, to safeguard this woman that other people shouldn't take advantage of her, we preclude him from divorcing her. Incredible. I'm Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So also Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said as follows. So the Gemara says from the Mishnah, Bailu, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri ish pshitale v'isha kami baile, o dilma isha pshitale v'ish kami baile. They will say, what was Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri asking about? Right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said in the Mishnah, why is it that a woman who becomes a chareshes ultimately again could be divorced, but ultimately again a man who becomes a chirish cannot divorce his wife? So the Gemara says as follows. According to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, ish pshitale ish kain baile, was it pashut for him about a man, but he was musubak about a woman? Or dilma isha pshitale ish kain baile, or maybe again it's pashut by the case of the woman, but he was musubak about the man. Tashma, but say look at what the Gemara said. Midkamru lei eino doma isha megarish isha miskareshes sha isha yotze l'rtzona v'shol l'rtzona. So they said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, you can't compare. Why? Because a woman could be divorced with her will or against her will. But a man could only divorce with his consent. You see, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's question was about the man, not about the woman. Adrabah, Ella Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Devrem Kamerlu. We'll say Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was asking Latana Kama. Watch this. With this we'll conclude. Lididi ki echidi ishlo matzi megarish ishnami lo megarisha. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, if you ask me, the same way that a man, if he is a shota, cannot divorce his wife, when a woman becomes a shota, she cannot be divorced as well. But according to you, Tanakama, why do you make a distinction between a man and a woman? And by a man, you'll say if a man becomes a shota, he can't divorce his wife. But if a woman becomes a shota, her husband can divorce her. And they say back to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri because you can't compare it. Because in general, divorce requires the das of the man, but doesn't require the das of the woman. So I will say, if you bring this all together, halacha l'maisa, well, this will stop. What we have is as follows. When the man becomes a shota, he cannot divorce his wife. Everyone will agree with that because, remember, divorce requires consent. When the woman becomes a shota, If she has the ability to watch her get, then halacha l'maisa midoraisa you can divorce her. Midrabanan you can't divorce her because we are concerned that people are going to take advantage of her. If she mamish doesn't have the ability to watch anything, her person or her get, then even midoraisa divorce will be impossible in such a situation. I will say we will stop here. Shkoyach, everyone. A wonderful morning of learning together. Shkoyach, thank you again to Moshe and to Jeremy for making this possible. Have a great day, Chevra. Chevra on Zoom. Great to see now I'm one of you. I'm one of you today also. Mamash Imana Chibet Sarah. I'm with you guys today. All right, Emir Hashem. Looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Shkoyach.